Hello. So I'm gonna try and make a video explaining what I can about um Wittgenstein and language games. So apparently this is gonna be what the next assessment is on, and I'm not. We did the topic about, I can't remember how long ago. It must have been 8 months ago, maybe a little bit less. So I've completely forgot most of it. So I've just watched a lecture on it to try and recap my memory a little bit. Um, I could remember some quotes from Wittgenstein from before, and one of them was he said, "Don't ask for meaning, ask for use." So I think this actually says is a nice summary of his theory almost, because well, he talks about language games, and he says that we have a set of words, and these words can be used in a different order in order to try and convey something, convey a message about the outside world. But he didn't say to convey a message, because he wasn't necessarily interested in the communicative elements of language. It was more like um language to try and label things, or to try and understand the outside world, maybe just for ourselves. Like when we use languages, um I'm using language right now, but uh yeah, I don't think I know enough about this to be able to make a detailed video. But this will basically just be me rambling on, just trying to figure things out a little bit. And then if I get anywhere, then great. If not, then not so great. But yeah, so okay, one thing that Wittgenstein talked about was um there's three kinds of statements, or three ways to look at language. I can't remember exactly how to categorize these, but he said if your dialogue is in order with is aligned with the order of the objects in the outside world, then your statement is true. If your words aren't in order with the order of with the organization of the objects in the outside world, then your statement is false. Um, and if your statement can't be tested, so if you can't prove whether it's true or false, whether your words are aligned with the outside world, with reality, then your statement is meaningless. So an example of a meaningless statement is God exists, because you can't prove it, but you can't disprove it. So Wittgenstein would say it was a meaningless statement, but I guess you could criticize that by saying, well, is it really a meaningless statement to say that God exists? Because that statement might have meaning to the individual that individual puts on it. And I guess it also depends on how you define God, because one person might define God completely differently to how another person might define God. Like an atheist might have a perception of what they think that someone who's theistic is worshipping, but is that necessarily what they're worshipping, or is it just their own hermeneutical interpretation of the word God? And that's possible as well. And that's one of like I was saying at the start, Wittgenstein said, don't ask for meaning, ask for use. So it's like you've got to look at the context of which your word is being used in order to be able to determine the meaning of it. So for example, if I use the word see completely out of context, I just say the word see, it doesn't mean anything. It could you might have connotations. It might bring images to your mind, but it's not necessarily going to get across any sort of coherent message about the outside world. To see something could be to visualize something, to look at something through your eyes, or you could say see as in, I know these words are spelled differently, but like the verbalization of the word is the same. I could say see, and it's like, well, some people might picture the ocean. So yeah, the context does matter in with words, and this sort of led him to call it language games. And the reason he did this was because a game has rules, and we sort of have to be able to play by those rules in order for the game to work and to make sense. And it doesn't mean that we're constrained to a small area, so we can't move around much. We can take language games anywhere. We can argue with people, we can use language for humour, we can do all these different things, which is like moving a chess piece. It's like you've got different decisions to make, and it's not going to be a straightforward path. I think he also called language a family resemblance. I think he called language that, and he calls quite a few things that. A family resemblance means that things that have relations to each other, but it's not necessarily that they're completely the same. So it's connected. I can't quite figure out how this is going to link to language. I know that he said. Okay, well, I'll give an example of a family resemblance. A family resemblance could be religion, for example. There are multiple different religions, but they're all under the same label of religion. But you can't necessarily derive one set definition or one set idea from religion, because there's so much differentiation between all of these different things which have the same name but different characteristics within them, but there is an overlap almost. So that's where it comes from, a family resemblance. If you think about your cousins, it's like you've got their genetics and you might have some things in common with them, but you're not the same person. You just have a relation. So within religion, within say Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, they all have something to do with prayer or meditation. And I say meditation because meditation and prayer, I guess, technically the same thing, except you're not communicating to a higher power. It's more like you're communicating to your inner self when you're meditating, whereas prayer, I would say, is more like trying to get in touch with a god. So that there's another example of a family resemblance. Well, that's just an extension of the example I gave initially about religion being a family resemblance. And we can also, I also think, link that back to language as I was explaining the example. I mean, I don't see how you couldn't link it back to language, seeing as though I'm using language to convey what I'm trying to say, or trying to figure out exactly what Wittgenstein was about. And I don't know how close I am to his ideas, but I'm using my language to try and almost get there, to try and get to where he was coming from. Yeah, so religion is a family resemblance. I can't really think of any other things off the top of my head. I mean, I guess you could say games are a family resemblance. It's like a game. It isn't just one thing. It's there's multiple different kinds of games which all have their own separate rules. But you know a game based on its characteristics. For example, it has shared characteristics. Like, it's like you have to be able to play by certain rules, such as you don't cheat in a game. Well, you shouldn't cheat in a game. I don't know. If I think of a specific game, like so Snakes and Ladders, you have to take turn with the other person. How can we link this to language? Well, you say your bit, and if you want to carry on that game with the other person, then you have to let them speak. You have to give them a chance to say what they have to say or want to say to you. Otherwise, it's not going to be a very long-lasting relationship with that person. Okay, so you have to take turns. You have to not cheat. So how could you think of this in terms of language? You don't lie, do you? Don't be deceptive. Don't try and deceive people, because it's not necessarily conducive to a good relationship, like I've just said, or good friendships, or whatever you want to characterize it as. So there does seem to be an overlap between language and games. And I guess that's what Wittgenstein was trying to say. He was, I don't know, but I think you could perhaps criticise. I don't know. I think perhaps it trivializes philosophy almost, by referring to language as by referring to our speech as language games, because a game is something that is perhaps done to pass time. It's something trivial, it's something mundane, it's something that you might it not be taken too seriously. By calling language, by referring to language as a game, perhaps it trivializes language. It says that language is just something that we use to try and define the world around us, and yeah. But obviously, I don't think that was his intention. So maybe you shouldn't be too overly critical on that point. But it's something to point out. I mean, I could write about it in an essay. But I wouldn't. I don't know if I'd go into that in great detail. One, because I can't explain it much, and two, because I think that I'm perhaps mischaracterizing what Wittgenstein was actually trying to convey with his words. Yeah. So and I know that Wittgenstein he said that most language is meaningless in that it doesn't necessarily tell us anything. Okay, no, I'm gonna get that wrong. It doesn't tell us anything about the outside world. Okay. Right, so the outside world exists nominally of our language, of our experience. And we know this because of the language we use. We can use language in a way which conveys a message about the outside world. It conveys truths. And we know this because multiple people can speak about something in the objective world, and we can come to a roundabout consensus about what this thing actually is. And this lets us know, well, perhaps there is actually something existing outside of ourselves. And this is a good argument against solipsism, I guess, because solipsists basically say that you can only be sure of your existence in the world, and you can't be sure that the external world actually exists. And to an extent, even alongside this argument of, well, if we can use language, and if I can use language and you can use language to describe the same thing, and we can come to a consensus about what this thing is, then maybe it actually exists. Well, you could say that everything's a simulation, everything's in your head, you're imagining that person's saying something to you, but I don't think that's very pragmatic. I think the fact of the matter is that we can suffer and that we seem to be able to form relationships, and if this is a simulation, then it's extremely advanced, and I don't think it's very far away from reality. We've learned to call this simulation reality, so we have to play by the rules of this reality. We have to play by the language games. Yeah, I can't remember where I was. Yeah, so we can use language to convey a message about the outside world. Or, no, we can use language to determine that the external world does have order and that it exists. But we can also use language to convey a message about our internal world, about what goes on inside our head, what we think about. And so if we can use language to convey a message about the outside world, and it seems to be truthful, does that also mean that the message that we're conveying about ourselves is also seemingly truthful? And how would you measure this against other people? Because I know that by determining the outside world, you interact with other human beings, and you realize that you can come to a consensus about how the objective world is organized. But when it comes to your own being, you can only look inside your head. You're the only one who's in there, so you're the only one who knows what's going on. So perhaps you have to almost take on blind faith that you're right about your experience, or that you I don't know. I don't think you can necessarily judge it in the same way that you can judge the external world. But I guess one way you could do it is if you consistently identify the organisation of the noumenal world, of the reality which exists outside of ourselves, and that does align with other people's perspective of the objective world and the way that they see it as being organised, which happens to be extremely similar or the same as how you see it as organised, then I think you can almost trust in yourself that you're correct when you're identifying your own internal world and the things that you think about and the things that you believe. And I don't really know where I'm taking this, but I feel like that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's an okay point to make. I don't know. I don't think it's too far off. This is actually a really interesting topic. I feel like this means of revising it is probably a lot better than sitting down and reading a textbook, because I like engaging. I like speaking about things because I find that it helps me learn them better. So I think they're some of Wittgenstein's key ideas anyway. Or at least the ones I can pluck off the top of my head. But I'll make another video on this, maybe tomorrow or something, or when I've had a bit of a chance to get my head around some more of his ideas, probably from watching some more lectures. The one I've just watched was 45 minutes long. Yeah, I got some of the ideas, I think. Yeah, so right, if you enjoyed watching, just subscribe and leave a like or whatever you want to do. Okay, right, thanks for watching.